Thank you very much, Ambassador. We appreciate sharing your experiences and with us, reflecting the period 1983 up to 2000, 1987 up to 1993, and even beyond when you were in active public service. When I say we Liberians have always had second thoughts about what America did, what America didn't do, what America should have done, even during the conflict and beyond. And these have been overwhelming concerns. We are happy that you have come in to provide a lot of information which up to now has not been made public and has been the subject of conjectures and speculations and rumors and all of that. So thank you very much. And commissioners at this time will ask some questions. Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kohen, for your frank statement. As you may know, I became involved in the peace process of Liberia through the Interfaith Mediation Committee, which you are familiar with. If I may ask, can you tell this commission, and through this commission, the people of the Republic of Liberia, Africa, and the world, when, how, and where America-Liberia relations began?
When did they begin?
Yeah, how, when, and where?
Well, this is a historic question. I may not be that expert on it, but as you know, the origin of the colonization of the Liberian coast, I believe, began in the 1820s, where some people in the United States felt that slaves who had been freed would really be incompatible with life in the United States, and therefore they would be much better. It would be better both for the United States and for them to go back to their country, their area of origin, which is West Africa. So this was the beginning of colonization of the Liberian coast. Now, when Liberia became an actual republic, I don't remember the exact date, but from that time on, I believe it was in the 1840s, the United States established diplomatic relations with Liberia. So it was, there was an opportunity for the United States to have a colony like the British and the French had. It was unfortunate that that Liberia did not become a U.S. colony, because the countries around Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, French Guinea, and Ivory Coast, all had much more development as a result of colonization. They had roads, they had health services, they had education services, which Liberia lacked. They did not have the resources to have that because there was not a colony. It was an independent republic. So U.S.-Liberian relations were quite normal throughout the 19th century, right up till the Second World War. If Liberia had been a colony, it would have been a bigger country, because the British and the French were snipping off parts of Liberia and getting away with it. There was no one stopping them. So I think the experience, the U.S. probably, both Liberia and the U.S. would have been better off if it had been a U.S. colony like the Philippines. Philippines was set free right after the Second World War. I'm doing some research now on the history of U.S. policy in Africa, and I came across a conversation between President Roosevelt in 1945 and some African-American journalists. And they said, well, the war is about to be ending. What are you going to do about Africa? And Roosevelt had never even thought about Africa. So he said, go over there and come back and give me your recommendations. So they went to Liberia, and they went to Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Ivory Coast. And they came back and they saw Roosevelt, and he said, what did you find? He said, Liberia is a disgrace to the United States. All these other countries are wealthy. Liberia is very poor. So Roosevelt wrote a memo saying, let's do something for Liberia, and what they did was build up the port of Monrovia. This was the beginning of the port of Monrovia. Now, of course, Roberts Field was built because of the Second World War, where we needed this field for sending our forces through to the Middle East and beyond. My own brother, who was old enough to be in the war, landed at Roberts Field, and then he went on to India when he was in the U.S. Army doing that. So the whole history of U.S.-Liberian relations was one of good relations, but keeping Liberia at arm's length. Well, the whole reason for Liberia's existence was to send freed slaves away from the U.S. So therefore, we wanted to keep them away. We didn't want to keep them close, you see. So that framed the whole relationship. And I sympathized with Samuel Doe in his meeting with Schultz when he said, we're doing everything for you. We're your best friend in Africa. Whenever there's a vote in the UN, we're with you. We defend you all the time. And what are you doing for us? Not much. When the U.S. invaded Panama, there was a vote in the UN to condemn the U.S. for invading a sovereign country. And the vote was something like 160-3 against the U.S. Now, who were the three who voted to support the U.S.? Israel, Liberia, and the U.S. were the three votes. So Liberia we could always count on Liberia. We needed the airfield, we didn't even have to ask permission. We had these antenna fields for the CIA and the Voice of America. Yeah. It was all there. And yet the U.S. sort of took Liberia for granted. And I'm just giving you my personal opinion there. But what really troubled me is that I was not allowed to go with the scheme to get Doe out and bring Taylor to power, which would have averted the total thing. And also, I learned a lesson as a diplomat that we should not tolerate surrogate wars. I don't think the people of Liberia were ready for a war against Doe. They may have disapproved of him or unhappy with him, but I didn't think they wanted a civil war where tribes would be killing each other. But it was brought about by outsiders. It was brought about by outsiders, and it was totally unjustified. And I think this should be brought to the light of day, because surrogate wars continue in Africa today. They're continuing. There's the war in Rwanda was like that. The war in Darfur is a surrogate war. And I think it's time for blame to be pointed at those people outside of countries who start these things. The president of Burkina Faso told me he was sorry, but, thanks a lot.
Thank you for that response. Do we then conclude from the response you have just given, taking into account how Liberia was established, America being initiator, and coupled with the fact that during the Second World War, Liberia risked its national sovereignty to declare war against Hitler, and during the United Nations election at the time of establishing Israel, Liberia broke the ties. Was it justifiable, logical, and grateful for that relationship in time of distress, of war, to just download that and in your own statement to say Liberia has no more interest in America has no more interest in Liberia?
Well, the U.S. has always been interested in Liberia, but after the Bush administration left, I think the Clinton administration became much more active. I was not part of that, but they became much more active in trying to bring about an end to the war in Liberia. I think the Clinton administration provided quite a lot of money, both for humanitarian relief, support for peacekeepers, and what have you. So there was an interest, and I think part of the reason for that is the great support that Liberia has always had from the diaspora. I mean, it's hard for the U.S. government to ignore the diaspora. They vote, they write letters to congressmen and what have you. So the United States has always wanted to has always taken an interest in Liberia, but whether it was enough and whether they did enough, that's something to be discussed. I think we took Liberia for granted. I think finally now, maybe that may be at an end. I think now we're paying much more attention to Liberia.
Can you tell us, if you know, knowing the security system of America, how Mr. Taylor escaped from prison?
Oh, when he was in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I don't know how he escaped. Let me give you some background there. He was head of General Services Department, right? And he left. He was being pursued by the Liberian government for investigation of corruption, fraud, stealing money. And he was in Massachusetts, and on the request of the Liberian government, he was arrested pending extradition, which is a normal procedure. There is an extradition treaty between the U.S. and Liberia. So he was being held by the state of Massachusetts. And what was needed was a documentation that could be given to the judge in Massachusetts that would enable the judge to decide whether he should be extradited to Liberia for trial. After his arrest, a long period of time went by and there were no documents supplied. Nothing came in from Monrovia in support of this extradition. So he was sitting in jail waiting to be dealt with through the judicial system. But nothing happened while they were waiting for these documents. And he escaped. I think he had been in prison something like 6 months. Now, how he escaped, I don't know. I have no knowledge. I have some suspicions that some people were tired of feeding him. And since he had not committed any crimes in the U.S., he was not accused of any crimes in the U.S., why continue feeding this gentleman? And if he's wanted so badly in Liberia, why didn't they get these paperwork in, you see? So you can draw your own conclusions from that.
My last is, before the starting of the war, there were many outcries in Liberia concerning human rights violations, dictatorships. But in your general testimony, you said you and the Secretary of State, Shaw, visited Liberia only to discuss with the new government budgetary adjustments, because you have felt that there was mismanagement. Do we then understand from that statement that the interests of the United States was never centered around human rights, democracy, justice, but budgetary system?
Well, let me put it this way. Until 1990, there were no democracies in Africa. Maybe you can consider Senegal and Botswana semi-democracies in those times, but all of African countries were one-party states and one-party dictatorships. All of Africa was like that. And all of them had various degrees of human rights abuses, corruption, rigged elections, and what have you. So U.S. policy up until 1990 was really, well, this is the way Africa is, and we're not in a position to tell Africa what to do. Where there are really egregious human rights violations, we really took action, and we had the annual Human Rights Report, which pointed all this out. But we did not have an aggressive policy to promote democracy until President Bush announced this in early 1990. And we started spending money to promote democracy. And the main thing is that Africans themselves were starting to put pressure on their own governments to democratize. So then you had the beginning of multi-party democracy. But until 1990, our policy was more attuned toward the Cold War and economic development. We really had no emphasis on these other issues. So we weren't treating Liberia differently from any other African country at the time. That's the way Africa was.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Former Secretary of State for African Affairs, Ambassador Kohen, for your candid personal opinion and also what you know with working within the government, United States government, international affairs era. In light of the last question asked by Sheikh Commissioner Kohen about America being more concerned about the economic interests and other things, there are rumors that the United States aided those overthrow of Talbot's government. Do you have any information or clarification on this? Because that's the rumors that have been circulating. In fact, we've been reading about it in books.
I have no personal knowledge of that. At the time, it was 1980.
80 years.
1980, I was director of intelligence and research for the State Department, and I think if the U.S. had been involved, I would have known about it. So I can state with almost certainty that the U.S. was not involved with that. It was a surprise.
Yes, and you haven't read about it anywhere like I have. You have not read about that?
I have not read about it, but I think I would have been in a position to know.
Okay.
All U.S. Intelligence activities have to go through the State Department. In 1980 to 1984, I was in charge of intelligence for the State Department, and I can guarantee there's nothing like that came across my desk.
Thank you for that clarification. You stated that initially America did play a role in trying to get involved with, quote, this surrogate war in Liberia. And all of a sudden, you got this instruction to halt the discussion. Was that because of the Persian Gulf at that time and America were more concerned about diverting the interest in there? Perhaps you don't know the reason because he said he didn't know the reason. Could we just assume, or could you give us some assumption, some reason you think?
I don't think the Persian Gulf operation, you're quite right to ask that question because the Persian Gulf War started in 90, and we were heavily involved. I know I was heavily involved in trying to get support in the Security Council from the African members who were Zaire, Ethiopia, and Ivory Coast. But I don't think that distracted us from what was going on in Liberia. We did take ships away from the Persian Gulf to put them offshore Liberia for the purpose of helping U.S. citizens get out. So that we did deprive U.S. forces of some ships. But I didn't think it had any relationship. The decisions made that we knew later were not given to me immediately was that there was this feeling that we didn't want to have Liberia become a ward of the United States. This was the interpretation. If they had asked me, I would have said this is nonsense. Liberia would not become a ward of the United States. But that was higher level decision making.
Coming back again to this human rights violation in the manner in which President Doe was killed and died. From your statement, America had agreed to let President Doe leave, and President Iadima had agreed. So we could say now the manner in which he died, because perhaps he still felt that going to the port was a way of him escaping. Some medium of escape had been made for him, not really realizing that there was some reason to hold this decision. Are you aware, within your knowledge, whether he knew that the United States had decided to pull their hand away from giving him this safe passage? Do you know whether he was aware?
Yeah, he was aware of that. Our ambassador told him that. He was assassinated in ECOMOG headquarters.
Yeah.
So I think the question that I would ask if I were in your spot was, did ECOMOG have anything to do with his assassination? But I have no knowledge. I can assure you that he knew that we were no longer going to offer to take him out by air travel.
Refreshing my memory, did you go to Liberia 1989 or the early part of 1990?
I went in '89. No, I did not go in '89. My last visit had been in late '87.
Okay.
When we were talking to Doe about implementing these reforms.
I don't know whether you recall, because it was then, just like in 2003, when the women of Liberia play an important role in stopping this for the Peace Accra Comprehensive Peace Accord. And because of the situation with President Doe at that time, the women of Liberia met secretly with you at the U.S. Embassy. I remember then I headed that group with Grace Manon, Titi Bear, Titi Gripper, Edith Dennis, the late, they had a cross-section of women, but we had to meet secretly, and we all signed a petition with over 3,000 names, and giving you the view of the women of Liberia and talking about the human rights abuses and asking the United States to intervene, in fact, in trying to help us.
When was that?
It must have been '87. It was the last time.
It was '87, yes, I'm sure.
And although, you know, you all saw Doe and the other people, but the women did gave you a petition.
I remember that
It
now.
was recorded because during the 1990s, when some of the women came trying to get their TPS, and so when they called their name, they referred to that document. So I want to say, truly, you did try you attempted to champion the peace and change the situation in the country using as best as you can, taking into consideration the United States diplomacy, how they feel about maybe their special interests versus the interests of others. We want to say thank you, and that's why at this time in our history, we couldn't leave you out, that by coming to participate with this process to give us what you know will help us, and history will judge you kindly. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert Parker, for your testing, for your support of this process. First of all, I'm very happy and honored to hear your testimony. I felt as I listened to you that you gave us a very sincere expression of your heart, even though some of the things were delicate to say, and that will always be respected. But then I hope that you can also bear with us, as I may have 4 questions to ask you that may be delicate, but again, is in the interest of world peace and trying to understand how we can go forward in our country. The first one, I'm concerned about the 70s. In the 70s of Liberia, we are asked in the commission to look into the root causes of our problems. And as you know, the coup of 1980 is like a root kickoff element